Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar looking at the future of employee experience. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your exceptionally busy schedules to be with us. And for those of you who weren't able to join us live and are watching us back on demand, thank you also for stopping in to watch us back. My name's Guthkelch and I'm from the Global Workplace from Meta team, joining you live from the UK. And it gives me great pleasure to be the host for today's discussion. Now, before we get started, I do want to do a couple of housekeeping points for you. Number one, I know this is always an important one for folks. The recording will be shared directly with all signups and available to watch and share with colleagues over the coming days. So you will receive a recording link to the session. Secondly, there is the ability to ask questions to our speakers today. And rather than have a formalized Q&A session, we're going to be weaving audience questions throughout the next hour. So please do make sure that you get your questions in as you think of them. Don't wait until the end, as we may be out of time or we may have hundreds of questions in front of you. So do make sure that you type in questions into the Q&A functionality below on your Zoom links. And one of the team will get those questions over to me as soon as they can. And I will be putting those to our wonderful guests. Right. That's all the housekeeping out of the way, so let's get going. People who tune into Workplace from Meta sessions a lot will know that we are heavily focused on employee experience, or to put it more accurately, on how leaders can create an organization where employees want, not need to show up to work. Now, back in 2020, pre-pandemic, employee experience wasn't a mainstream concept, and employees and employers alike were figuring out exactly what it meant in the day-to-day work. Now things are different. Employees have caught up on to the importance of their own employee experience, and businesses really do need to catch up. In 2022, the dynamic between businesses and their employers changed. Regardless of the COVID status over the world, employees now have a fundamental sense of what good employee experience means to them. As a result, a gap is now forming between how companies think that they're addressing employee experience need and how it's actually being perceived, therefore driving significant talent challenges and an urgency for change. Now, we've all seen the headlines about the Great Resignation, the Great Reprioritization, the Great Reshuffle, but we really believe that organizations and leaders now have the great opportunity. Although organizations have come a long way over the past 2 years, there's still room for growth and improvement when it comes to employee experience. Many companies and their employees are still adapting to the new world of remote or hybrid work. Others are recognizing that while well-being benefits are important, broader cultural shifts need to take place in order for people to truly feel supported at work. And employees and employers alike are recognizing just how important it is for the workplace to foster true connection and purpose. So what is the future of employee experience and how can you get your business ahead? That's what we're here to talk about. So who better to talk about this topic than our two fantastic guests? We've got Brynn Harrington, the VP of People Experience at Meta. Her team is responsible for Meta's global talent management, internal community, HR communications, and future of work experiences. And we also have Dan Schawbel, who is a New York Times bestselling author and managing partner of Workplace Intelligence, and is globally recognized as a leading authority in the future of work. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Now, Dan, I'm going to start with you first. What do you believe the future of employee experience is? Oh, Dan, I think you might be on mute.
The future of employee experience is very immersive. Right now, a lot of people are complaining about Zoom fatigue. People are on Zoom calls for hours and hours a day. I mean, we're on Zoom right now. eventually, in order to keep engagement high and make people feel a sense of belonging and make work fun, we've done a lot of research that shows that people also want to have fun at work because work and life are so blurred. Immersive environment, eventually being a full metaverse is going to be really effective because it's going to get people really engaged, excited, and people are going to be able to have fun. But in the meantime, it is about incremental things that leaders and managers can do in order to enhance that employee experience from hiring to offboarding and everything in between. It happens day to day, and there are all these new complexities that we study. First off, the hybrid working, people could be, remote first. People could be in a full hybrid environment. People could be stuck in an office 5 days a week. There are various different scenarios that people could be living and working in, and everyone's needs need to be accounted for at those periods of time when it matters most, and that's going to change. So I think the greatest challenge for a worker, a manager, even a CEO in today's world is to adapt to change and to take in the needs of account of all the employees, not just remote workers, but also potentially hourly workers, people of different seniority, people of different generations, people of different ethnicities and genders. So I think that there's an enormous opportunity to start listening to the voices of every employee, regardless of position and title, to be able to make better decisions about the technologies that they're using, how they're adapting, and really helping them build the future of work.
I love it, Dan. Thank you so much for that insight. Now, Brynn, I'm going to come to you next. How are we at Meta designing for the future of employee experience?
It was really adding on to what Dan said. I mean, from the beginning, we've always talked about Meta as a really people-centric organization, and we've talked about our experiences designing around people. And I think in the last 2 years, we've learned that that's more important than ever. And as we think about the future, Dan alluded to this, but really designing intentionally is going to be really, really critical. If you think about the past when teams and organizations have been fully co-located, we've been able to rely on a lot of informality to define the experience and to really keep cultures alive. As we look toward a world where we know that people and teams are going to be more distributed, where we're going to be able to hire experts from all over the world, it really, makes it important that we are designing with intention at the center. So the way that we're doing that, we are actively listening to our employees right now, more than ever. Thankfully, we're living in a time when we've got a ton of ways to get signal about how employees are feeling. Obviously, we use Workplace for input. We're running polls, we're running qualitative research, we're running quantitative research. We are actively trying to understand what matters most to people, what's working for them and what's not. And then really, to Dan's point, being agile and being responsive to that. The final thing that I would say in terms of sort of high-level design is I think we're moving toward a world where we're relying less on rules and more on guardrails and really empowering people with the information and the context that they need to make good decisions about how they work. So again, the way you design for employees at the center is making sure they have clear expectations, enough guardrails, enough context, but we're giving them, the freedom to make choices that are best for them in terms of how and where they want to work.
And what Brynn and I both believe in is also about empowering managers. Of course, HR and the talent function can create and promote different workplace policies, such as being remote first. But what's really critical is that the managers are equipped to handle the day-to-day conversations with their employees, because things are going to come up. Someone could have a life event. Someone died, someone was born. They might need to take some time off. They might work in a very unique way. Maybe they work better in the morning versus at night. So there's all these different things that are happening, and that's why things need to be people-centric, because people are different, and you need to take everyone's needs into account. And that's not going to be easy, but with technology, it's possible.
I want to add just on the role of the manager, and we may come back to this, but I do think when you think about designing for the future, we are, the way that you drive equity for people, no matter where they are, is by making sure managers have deep clarity and are operating consistently in terms of the conversations that they're having with people. So making sure that no matter where someone is, they're having a regular feedback conversation. No matter where someone is, they have a sense of like what the trajectory of their career could look like, what might be next and what might be out in the future. So, we've been having a lot of these conversations as it relates to broader DEI issues in the workplace. And I'm just super inspired about this moment because I think building this kind of consistency and structure for the future of work is going to keep the playing field level across the board in all dimensions of DEI, or it has that promise. Obviously, we have to do the hard work to make that true. So Abby, I'm sure you're trying to get in, but I know
I'm like, yes, keep going. There's
Yeah.
so many different entry points that I could go to next. Firstly, I just need to say we are getting a lot of questions coming in from the audience. So thank you, everyone. Keep those questions coming in. I will be coming back to them in a minute, but I just want to double click into one point, which was around the importance of remote first approaches. And that's something that, we ourselves are looking at and working with at Meta. And Dan, I know that, in your blog post that you wrote for us around remote first, that was absolutely a point that you really drew out. But I'm interested, we're going to have a lot of people from frontline organizations on the call, and remote first just isn't an option for some of these organizations with hourly workers. And I'm wondering, how can these types of organizations with hourly workers level the playing field, given that we are seeing a lot of frontline workers exiting frontline roles to get that flexibility?
That's a great question. And many of the times we talk about remote work or remote first, we're really talking about knowledge workers, but they're about 50% or less of the total US economy. Hourly workers are, many of whom are essential workers, tend to be forgotten. So what we did over the past few years, we investigated, like, okay, if knowledge workers get to work remote and, flexible hours and various other flexibility, benefits and whatnot, then what do hourly workers get? So we interviewed heads of HR, we interviewed hourly workers to figure out what they wanted. And the conclusion is they want schedule flexibility. So it's not about kind of a reduction of hours or work or being on site. It's about being able to kind of maneuver their hours in their daily schedule so that they're able to accomplish what they want to in their personal life. So in a sense, for knowledge and hourly workers, it is this end of 9 to 5 day structure and a little bit more flexibility so that people can embed some of the life situations and activities that they enjoy into their daily schedule. And the thing about flexibility is when we're, born, we want freedom and flexibility. So it's not like that ever goes away as you become an adult, even though your life situation changes and maybe you have kids, maybe, you have different goals, personal goals, professional goals. Everyone wants freedom and flexibility. And so making that work is going to be slightly different per organization, per, worker and department. But I think that, again, it goes back to what Brynn and I were talking about. HR makes the policies, but managers, and I've been talking to a lot of managers at really big companies, store managers, at retail stores, and they are all about, within the corporate guidelines, trying to make it work within their team because everyone's different. And so I think we've entered the age of kind of like this mass customization of not just kind of employee benefits, which is something that I'm sure Brynn will talk about, but also we've entered the age of kind of mass customization when it comes to the workforce and to have a more fluid workforce. And I think that those needs to be taken into account. We're going to see a lot more, hourly workers become potentially knowledge workers in the future, and people shift in and out of positions more to accomplish certain goals. And because organizations using technology can unearth skills that, people didn't even recognize in others before. So I think that using digital communications, as we're talking about here, is going to be incredible for unearthing some of the talent and skills that we might not be privy to.
Fantastic. I'm going to dig into a question from Teresa Winters, because it's something that you've both been talking about, which is around people managers and and training. And she raised a valid point, which is, there's so much for people managers of today to get their head around, not least hybrid. We're trying to create capability building in bite-sized pieces, but you could share 20 different modules on managing hybrid teams alone. How are we managing that? How are we managing that at Meta, Brynn? Could you give some insight?
You bet. So there are a couple sort of categories of things that managers are thinking a lot about right now. First, like there's a heavy logistical conversation right now as people are coming back to offices and teams are starting to work in hybrid mode. So the way we're addressing that piece is just making sure that we are giving really clear guardrails in terms of what's expected. And also, we've really positioned 2022 specifically as a year of learning. We know that we don't have all the answers. I think, we've gained a lot of trust with our managers and our employees by acknowledging that we don't have all the answers. And so we've got clear communication channels in place, and we're sort of updating our guidance every quarter based on the things that we're learning. And we've set the expectation that there's going to be a lot of change. So that's kind of the logistical front. In terms of equipping managers to lead distributed teams, our foundational belief is that a lot of managing distributed teams is about doing the basics of management exceptionally well. So as we talked earlier, this is about making sure that managers are able to have consistent conversations with people about their careers, no matter where they are. It's making sure that when someone new starts on your team, you actually sit down with that person and understand what's important to them. Where do they want to go? What are your strengths? What are the dynamics of your life that you want to share that might be relevant in terms of how and when you need to work? And so those aren't necessarily brand new skills, but what we know is that the basics have to be done exceptionally well. So for us, this is things like setting clear expectations, making sure people have really concrete goals in place, building structures to make sure people are getting the feedback that they need. One of our foundational manager capabilities is around showing deep care. And I think, that's really been critical during the pandemic, and it will continue to be critical moving forward as we move into this really personalized way of working. So that's how we're thinking about the capability piece. And then from a mechanics perspective, in terms of how we're actually training, we do really deep onboarding for managers when they start as managers. We take them through a multi-day, sort of full day, you could argue like a boot camp style experience, where they learn both about kind of core processes and philosophically about what's really special about being a manager at Meta. And then we, have a full curriculum of ongoing training that they can do on demand based on the areas where they're looking to grow. And then obviously, as we're in this period where we're really migrating into hybrid work and equipping them to lead distributed teams, we're bringing them together more often. We're doing something called manager labs that are quarterly, where we bring our managers together. It's a facilitated exercise on a specific topic. For example, we're doing one right now on performance management and feedback. And we both give them some training and we give them some time to work and learn from each other. Obviously, we know that peer-to-peer learning is really, really effective and is increasingly how people want to learn. So that lab format gives us the ability to drop in topics as they're emergent, as we're learning, to make sure we can meet managers where they are.
That's wonderful. Lots, I think, for people to think about on their side. I'm sure a lot of them those areas are being covered, but some really good points on that side. Brynn, you mentioned about care there. And I think that's another topic that I'd love to explore, which is, workplaces are really pivoting towards kinder, gentler environments, of which, of course, we've been saying it, line managers, people managers are a core part of enabling these environments and these experiences. Dan, I'm going to come to you first, but how should organizations be designing human-centric strategies that support holistic well-being?
At the highest level, if we solve for human needs and support humans at work, then we unlock workplace potential. And I think a lot of what Brynn was saying is something that I've believed in since, I started my career, is we got to start to look at people as humans and give them the safety and security, and assurance that if they share ideas and they give feedback, that we take it seriously. Maybe we can't do everything, And maybe we should acknowledge that we can't. Maybe it's for budgetary reasons, maybe because it's too complicated because the organization has, 50,000 employees or whatnot. But I think that acknowledging people is really key. And so when it comes to management, I think something as simple as how are you feeling might seem simple, but it's not done enough. And it can have a huge impact on the relationship between manager and employee. And managers, when we talk about employee experience, of course, technology is a huge component, but a lot of people leave their organizations because of a poor relationship with their coworkers, but especially their manager who evaluates them. And so I think that building and forging those relationships, whether it's, remote first or hybrid or however you're situated, I think some of the core principles of management and leadership will be maintained. So a lot of what Brynn was talking about, we could talk about this in 50 years. I think the different dynamics are changing, such as people having a little bit more flexibility, the way business is being conducted, and the use of technology to augment the work experience. But I think the core management principles, I can't see those changing. They've held up until now, right? And it's been way before I was born. So I think that the opportunity is to kind of treat people like humans, take their needs into account, survey them, like Brynn was saying. This whole idea of getting feedback from employees in a satisfaction score once a year is just not enough anymore, especially with all the changes we're experiencing. So it's getting into this habit of checking in on employees, collecting that type of data, so more the qualitative data, but then also conducting the quantitative surveys to get a better sense overall throughout the organization about how people are feeling about things. Between the qualitative and the quantitative, you can make better decisions as a leader and as a manager. And I think that's what's really going to help people understand their workforce and then be able to solve those human needs so that they can be as productive as possible.
I would add to, as it relates, just again, to give like a practical example of what's worked. And this is a really fresh one that it was reminded of last week. So, I think there are the broad listening channels and how we as an organization are listening to the broad population. But obviously, like there are things that we can do to make sure that one-on-one relationships are really set up for success. We've learned through our research that having really strong relationships with your sort of inner circle of people that you work with actually helps you build stronger relationships with that next level of people in the organization. So one thing that we do is when people join Meta, one of the things they're prompted to do during their onboarding is to fill out like a one-page view of who they are. Mm-hmm. And we give them prompts to share, what are they great at? What have they done in the past? What are they really proud of? If they want to offer it, what do they want to do? And what do they like to do in their free time? It really paints a picture of the employee, and obviously they can choose to share what they want to share. But I had an experience last week where I had a one-on-one with someone on my team who's not a direct report, relatively new, hadn't spent time with him one-on-one. And he sent me this ahead of time to look at. And I immediately understood so much more about him and was able to drop into that conversation with him in a way different way than if I wouldn't have had that. So again, it's not a highly technological fix. That's like a very human fix that supported us being in that sort of deep care space from the first minute we were connecting.
Yeah, and I love this. It's like, don't let technology be a barrier between you and your colleagues or manager. Let it kind of augment and support those relationships. And I think that's what we have to remember. The technology is not meant as kind of a distraction or to kind of ignore other people. It's about understanding who this person is, when's their birthday. Like, it's really kind of back to the basics in that regard. And I think technology is able to capture some of this information to help people better understand those they're working with so they can form these better, deeper relationships. And I think that's, over time, there was a whole study called Vital Friends that was published many years ago. And they found that if people have friends, especially best friends at work, they're more likely to stay with the company because if you have really good relationships, there is a cost of not having those relationships and working at another company, even if it's for a few $1,000s more.
We're getting a lot of love for focusing in on human, and there's been a couple of comments around, we're humans, not robots. So a lot of enjoyment and love for the conversation that we are having. Just to pick up on the point there, Dan, we've had a question to come in from Harsha Gad and asking, how do you scale in a world where employers want employees to come back to the office?
I think a lot of it comes down to communication and setting expectations. And what Brynn said earlier pretty much nails this question too. It's, things are going to be changing. So you got to constantly set these expectations and just be honest with, hey, we're going to be in flux, but we're definitely not the only company that's going to be in flux. And I also think it comes down to the individual situations between managers and their teams, like we were saying before too. It's working and having those open lines of dialogue and collecting that feedback, whether it's, a phone call, whether it's using technology to be able to do what you can to enhance and maintain that employee experience. So I think that from a high level, the organization needs to keep collecting feedback and try and make the best moves possible, but be transparent in the fact that things are going to be changing and that will continue potentially forever to be a challenge that will be overcome day in, day out.
I might just add, I think it's really helpful to give people just, again, guardrails or a frame for how to think about this. So, what we've done is, for those of you who've been following Meta, Mark made a really significant commitment in May of 2020 to remote work. And so obviously we've been really working to enable remote work. We know that's going to help us hire the talent that we need and really take work to people versus asking people to uproot their lives and move to the places where we have offices. So then what we've asked employees to do as we're entering this period where we're reopening offices at scale, we're just asking them to make a clear choice and tell us how they want to work. And they can either choose remote work and they understand what that looks like. They understand sort of what the benefits package looks like and how they're set up as a remote worker, or they can choose to come back to the office and they know what those expectations look like. And then we've built in, a cadence of gatherings for full teams to come together. And we're asking teams to be really mindful of when they come together as full teams. But again, just like that choice point is really clear for people in terms of being able to tell us what's meaningful. And then their manager, obviously, and their org leader knows what the composition of the team and the org are, and they can plan around that. So I don't think this can be like Wild West, come back if you want. I think that we know that humans need some degree of certainty. They need some degree of guardrails. And I think really crisp language and definitions and expectations can support that.
Thanks, Brynn. I agree absolutely in terms of being able to give some examples from what we've been doing. Now, we've had a couple of questions come in just on the use of guardrails. And is there a difference between guardrails versus rules?
Yeah, I mean, I think rules would tell you explicitly like what you need to do and when you need to do it, and you could be, there may be consequences if you don't do that thing. What we know is, as we were trying to design the future of work, we really looked at like how work was happening within the company, and what we realized was like, and this isn't an earth-shattering revelation, there is no one size fits all. Like work is really flexible and fluid. It's not fixed. Different teams work really, really differently. I mean, Abby, your team would work really differently than my team would work at Meta, right? And so what we've tried to do is give people these guideposts or guardrails, but flexibility within that. So for example, we're asking that full teams come together approximately on a quarterly basis to make sure that full distributed teams are spending time in person together. For some teams that may need to be more frequent, for some teams that might be less frequent. That's not like a hard number, but it's a mental model that people can think about. We've said that we expect that people who are working in offices will be, once we're sort of fully up and running, we'll be back in offices about 50% of their time. We haven't said it has to be these days per week, or this is exactly how you have to set up your team, because we know for some teams, they're going to be doing intensive work together at certain points, and then may have periods where they don't need to come together as intensely. For some teams that are like fully co-located and have a rhythm, it makes sense for them to come in set days per week. So again, it's setting an expectation, but then giving managers and individuals and org leaders some flexibility within those expectations to make sure that they're designing work in ways that match the things that they're trying to do and support the best impact.
Thanks, Brynn. I'm going to switch gears slightly. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, but I'm just going to, really lead the conversation into another area, and that's around belonging, around purpose. Dan, I know that this is a huge passion subject for you around the importance of belonging, and I know last year your firm conducted some research that found 4 out of 5 employees feel that people at their organizations aren't heard fairly or equally, especially millennials, Gen Z, non-caregivers and essential workers, which always blows my mind, that stat. But how can organizations create an organization culture of psychological safety and trust?
Yeah, I think one of the things when you have a distributed workplace is people can feel that their voices are not heard. And they're definitely not heard equally based on, our research, younger people, non-caregivers, essential workers, not heard as much. And I think that feeling of inequality makes people feel less engaged and makes them maybe want to look elsewhere for a job. And so I think it goes back to this whole idea of making sure that everyone's connected, everyone knows, the purpose of the company, values are communicated and upheld regularly. Lots of communication, all of these type of surveys and conversations between managers and employees to kind of make people feel like their ideas are being heard and that maybe they can influence some decisions. And I think that technology is going to play a huge role in giving people kind of I wouldn't say an exact even playing ground, but making people feel like they can engage in a way in which that they feel like they're more part of the workplace. And I also am very bullish on, the metaverse as well as virtual reality and helping augment that experience to kind of put people closer to, power and decision-making in a very unique, powerful, exciting way. So I think that's eventually where we'll go when we talk about the future of employee experience. But I think for today, it comes down to kind of closing the gaps in the workplace between working in an office and not working there and getting the same experience and making people feel like they're connected and they're not at a disadvantage because, we've done some research recently on people feeling disadvantaged when there's hybrid and certain colleagues are at the office, whereas other people are remote. So the ones at the office potentially could get more, of a career boost because they're, 2 feet from maybe the CEO, whereas the remote worker doesn't have that type of face time. So I think a lot of these new things are coming up, but I think that technology is going to enable people, as long as, everyone embraces it, to be able to kind of remove some of those potential disadvantages, get people on the same plane and communicating, because I think purpose overall, not just what Brynn was saying, purpose in terms of why are we going to the office in the first place? Why are we meeting first? And why are we using one tool over the other technology tool? But I think it's also purpose in terms of people feeling a sense of dignity and then that they're making an impact, because that's core to what it means to be a human. And if you think about someone's day-to-day, people spend a third of their day working, a third of their day not working, a third of their day asleep. But that third of the day working is probably a little bit more now, because based on our research, people working, probably those who are working remote, are working potentially 5 or so hours more per week. So more of people's identity is being wrapped up in work, especially in America. And therefore we have to really pay attention to that work experience and drive the sense of purpose so they can connect who they are with what they do. And that'll impact the retention rate and their ability to produce results.
Brynn, thank you, Dan. Sorry, there's so many questions coming through. I'm just keeping an eye on them. Brynn, leading on what Dan said, and you mentioned it earlier around DEI. We've had a question come in from Guz Gomez, who's asking, how can we engage in DEI conversations on a global scale for a multinational company for creating a belonging, inclusive environment? And I know this is an area deep to your and close to your heart. And I just wonder if you can share some examples from Meta.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think that's one size fits all. I can share a little bit about how we're thinking about it. When our current head of diversity started, she started just after I did, and she's probably been here about 8 years. And she did really extensive work with our leadership team to help them personally understand the issues with DEI, what it means to really look at it from a systems perspective, and how, at the full organizational systems level, we're empowering people to keep the playing field. We're keeping the playing field level. So again, that comes back to a lot of the things I mentioned earlier around consistency and making sure that we're driving an inclusive experience in terms of the way that we're designing it. I think this question was, the way I understood it was that this is about really igniting a dialogue and making sure that this is top of mind for people. So what I would say is, I think this moment is creating an opening for us to really rethink the organizations that we want to have in the future. What we've done this at the company level. Obviously, our head of diversity and her extended team are very, very vocal within the company. At org level gatherings, in org level Q&As, we're making sure that this topic is really, really top of mind. We've built in some really specific trainings that we are running the whole company through and have for many years. This isn't new for, related to the pandemic, but really making sure that people managers and everybody, again, understand inclusion, not just on a person-to-person level, but really on a systems level, and how they can make change in their jobs, especially if you're in a position of power. And then, we have really, really thriving, we just renamed them as we renamed the company, meta resource groups, which really are our community groups focused around various affinity groups. And, we've seen those organizations really gain speed during the pandemic, and expect that those are really going to be strong support systems as we're continuing to hire people who are maybe identifying with an affinity group, but not co-located with people that they fully identify with. The final thing that I would say, obviously my team works on talent programs. We use those meta resource groups as a way to really test a lot of our talent programming and a lot of the things that we're looking to roll out to the company. So we're really designing for a lot of our underrepresented groups first, knowing that that's going to obviously fully impact the rest of the organization. So we're in constant dialogue with those meta resource groups. And, I would just say, if you haven't seen our head of DEI talk, it would be worth looking for some. I'm sure she's done some things with workplace, but she's really helped ignite a dialogue at the company level that she ignited, but leaders themselves are owning. And I think, that's the most critical piece to really making this stick.
Absolutely agree. Maxine is wonderful and just a fantastic speaker, and what she's brought through to the company has been amazing. I'm just going to stick with Brynn for a minute, because you did mention our name change to Meta, and one of the things that came off the back of that was a relaunch of our company values. Could you give the audience a little bit of an overview and insights into what we did and why we did it?
Sure. So for those of you who've been following, we did change our name last year and really announced a new vision to build for the metaverse. That was a really significant change for the company. And so on the heels of that, we looked at whether our, Mark calls it our cultural operating system. So whether our operating system for the way that we get things done was really setting us up for success as we build to that future. And so obviously we looked at loads of research that we've gotten formally and informally to really understand how people were experiencing our culture, and to think through what was the North Star that we needed to move toward, what needed to stay the same and what needed to change. My personal belief is that, cultural change should never really be revolution. It should be evolution. It's really important to stay true to, the DNA of the company, what your legacy is, who you are, and be really open to being able to make changes that help catapult you into the future. So, I'll share a couple. So we did end up updating our values. Some of them were minor changes. For example, we had a value that was focused on impact that evolved into focus on long-term impact. Obviously, the time horizon for the metaverse is much different than the time horizon that we were working at in the past. And so we wanted to acknowledge that. So that's a really good example of kind of a slight evolution. We also looked at some brand new concepts that we thought were really, really important to the organization. One, picking up on what Dan said earlier about the metaverse and this idea that like in the future, we are going to be able to be present across distance. We introduced a value called Live in the Future, which is really about operating as a distributed first organization. And what we call, at our company in Silicon Valley, dog fooding the products that we're building and making sure that we are using the things that we are building for the future every day, because it's going to help us build faster and build better. So that was really a way to rally the company around operating as a distributed first company and building toward this future where people are able to be present wherever they are at work and in life. Two other things I would just hit on if it's helpful. Another value we introduced was this, we call it Meta Mates Me. This is the idea that it's really important for people to operate in service to the company, to their team, and to themselves. Obviously, as we look at being a more distributed organization, it's really important that people feel a sense of connection to what we're doing, to why we're doing it, to the team that they're on. And so that value is really a North Star to help us build the behaviors that really show connection to the company, to team, and to self. And I guess, the final one that I might just offer as we're talking about employee experience is we added a value called Build Awesome Things. And awesome isn't meant to be this like California awesome. This is literally like build awe-inspiring things that people love to use. And the reason I share that here is because that doesn't just relate to products. Like when I think about building the employee experience, like it's our responsibility to make it awe-inspiring. We know that the stakes are really high. We know that employees have a lot of choice. We know we are operating in a fierce and highly competitive talent market. So the onus is on us to make sure that the experience we're creating is awesome. So that concept of awe-inspiring definitely translates beyond our product teams. So yeah, it was a journey, and we hope this helps us chart the course for the next chapter.
Fantastic, Brynn. Thank you so much. We are running at about 15 minutes left. It all goes so quickly. Dan, I'm going to come to you with a question that we've had in from Ben Holfield, who, you said you're a fan of the metaverse, where we're taking it. He works for Accenture, who has purchased a number of VR headsets, loving using it, and really helping new joiners to connect, etc. But afterwards, everything goes back to regular calls and chats. What kind of employee experiences could you see as recurring use cases in metaverse environments that enhance human connection, productivity, belonging, happiness? I'd love to get your thoughts on it.
It's a great question. When Facebook changed their name to Meta, the first thing I was thinking of as, more, there's going to be, it's like a $12 trillion opportunity, the metaverse. That's a stat from a study that Citi published, I think like last month or so. And I think the opportunity is like, let's look back at the applications of Second Life. Second Life was like an early metaverse, if any of you remember it. I remember I was working for a very big technology company, and we were using Second Life for different applications. Like one was like career fairs, like gathering people in the metaverse, they wait their line, but they're interacting in a unique way rather than like the normal career fair where you're walking around, it's more, you're pretty nervous about walking up to different people. Are you really getting good interaction? So I thought that was a good application. I thought another application was that I've seen is like learning and development, especially when it comes to AR and especially VR, where you can learn, especially, in dangerous fields, like if you're operating, I don't know, a plane or even in the military was a really cool application too. And it's like you're on let's say on the battlefield, but you have a 0% chance of getting injured, but you're learning how to maybe, dodge fire or whatever you need to do, to survive, in the military, or to make good plans and win, or protect people. And I think that those applications, learning and development, kind of career fairs, interviewing, and then I think it creates, and we've seen this recently with Meta, like creating like, interesting conversations and connecting with people for meetings, because a lot of people, I'm not going to say everyone, don't like meetings or think that meetings need to be either shorter or improved in some way. And so anytime people, for instance, on Zoom, they feel like they're suffering from Zoom fatigue, or they think a lot of meetings are a waste, to me, that's an opening for new technology or a new way of doing things to take over and improve that situation. So I always listen to when people complain about things, and then I'm always like, okay, well, maybe there is solutions, for instance, a metaverse or using, VR as part of that to be able to engage people. So the meetings that you used to think were terrible and a waste of time are now something that's immersive and fun. I think that part of what the metaverse and virtual reality and all these new technologies bring is, because we're spending so much time at work, these need to be more immersive and fun so that we're enjoying it better. Then when we're not working, we're telling our friends and all these other people that we're having fun working. We have a smile on our face, and that ends up marketing the company anyways. And especially for, a company like Meta or a consumer driven company, people's work experience impacts consumerism. We did a whole study on this many years ago. So if you're enjoying your work experience, you're more likely to want to buy from that company and recommend the company to others from an employment or consumer perspective. So I think that that's another play. But in general, there are so many different applications that we can't even think yet. But I look at the past to see certain things, like for instance, Second Life, that worked and people enjoyed, even though it was maybe ahead of its time. That can easily happen in the metaverse as we see it today and in the future.
Fantastic, Dan. Thank you. A quick one. I'm going to come to each of you. I'm going to go Brynn first. What's your best tip for asynchronous work from Hannah?
Best tip for asynchronous work. Let's see. I would share a couple things. First of all, so I'll share one that's kind of organizational and one that's personal. Organizationally, when we're talking now, we're talking a lot about meetings. People are thinking a lot about meetings as we're in hybrid mode. And so we're saying that as we think about meeting tips, the first meeting tip is make sure you need a meeting. We do know that people are defaulting to meetings for things that we don't need to have meetings for. And so I think just programming an organization to be thoughtful off the bat, do you need a meeting, is probably the first step. Second thing, I would say personally, one thing that I'm pretty excited about is, and I do this with my team, it's we will do virtual brainstorms. So obviously we use Workplace, but I'll post a question or something that I'm trying to work through, or anyone could post this in our team group, and we'll work on it over the course of 24 or 48 hours to introduce articles that are related to that, to add ideas, to build on each other's ideas. It's awesome because obviously it's different than doing a live brainstorm in a meeting. It gives people space to kind of come into the conversation as it makes sense for them. It gives people who have a range of work styles a voice in a different way. And then for me personally, it's really helpful to be able to take an hour and digest everything that was kind of in the thread and come up with a point of view that then we can take forward. So anyway, just, I don't know, brainstorming, right-storming, brainstormageddon. That's mine. Over to you, Dan.
And I'll just build off of yours. I remember I was researching for my book, Back to Human, and one of the stats that I include in the book that I thought was really interesting is a study that found that one face-to-face conversation is more impactful than 34 emails back and forth. And the conclusion from that is that you need to, carry the right message or have the right use case for the medium that you're using. So clearly, if you're emailing 34 times, the message is not getting across. So maybe a phone call would be better, or in-person chat. Same with any technology that we're discussing. Some things are better for Zoom. Some things are better in person. Some things are better for maybe the metaverse. Some things are better for, Slack or some other technology. And I think that that's really important, is to have an intent by why you're doing things, but also choose the right medium to have that type of communication so that it's effective.
Perfect. Thank you both. Always looking for tips on async work. We have had a question in, I don't have a name attached to this, sadly, it is an anonymous attendee, but I think it's an important one to address, which is, what is the place of sustainability, there we go, I can say it now, in the new workplace? How can we use the workplace as a place that makes employees empowered to regenerate the environment, the workplace as a force for good for the planet and for people? Brynn, can I come to you?
Sure. I mean, obviously, this is on the minds of everybody. I have 3 kids. This is like a regular conversation around our dinner table, just in terms of really like what organizations can do as we think about climate. You know, a couple things as we think about the reality of this new world. Obviously, in a world where teams are more distributed, and you know, if you look out 10 years and you believe that we're going to be able to be present wherever we are using our technology, then travel isn't going to be needed. But, you know, between now and then, travel is going to be important. We know that people need face-to-face interactions. And so I think just making sure that people are really clear about the trade-offs of travel, and teams are really intentional about how they're building travel programs, and building that sort of with input from employees in mind is going to be important. You know, obviously we are on our campuses, we're doing a lot to think about how we can make sure that we've got sustainable practices for food and waste, and just the day-to-day, you know, we've gotten rid of water bottles, like really basic things in our offices to signal that the organization cares. And then, you know, I would say for Meta broadly, like you know, our social impact teams are working on climate. I think I always believe that the deepest impact actually comes up at the business strategy level, and how we can really address it from a business perspective. So obviously we've got product teams that are really looking at what we can do to address climate issues. And if we engage our employees in those conversations, they have access to the roadmaps and understand what we're doing moving forward.
Fantastic. Brynn, thank you so much. I'm going to squeeze in one final question. And that is, what leadership challenges do you predict impacting cultural change and organizational change and behaviors in adopting new immersive technology within the metaverse? Dan, I'll come to you first.
I think and this is why I think we all believe like there's going to be incremental change, and people are going to adapt and adapt and adapt and adapt and adapt for probably ever, because people change, you know, generations grow up differently, and maybe people have different needs at different times. You know, it's the complexity of this new workplace. So I think that the technology will continue to adapt to, and incrementally, we're talking about a cultural, societal, you know, behavioral change. And that doesn't happen in 24 hours. It takes a lot of time. Like I remember when, you know, it was early in the pandemic, and, you know, about a fourth of people who never work remote for the first time. And it's not like they adapted to it in 24 hours. It took time, and, you know, the manager was supporting them. And then the organization was setting, you know, policies that they did. A lot of these companies didn't even have a remote work policy. So they had to develop that, and that took time. So things that are just going to take time. I think and this kind of goes back to one of my big tips just in general for someone's career, is you just have to, you know, be accepting of change, you know, incorporating your own feedback to try and, you know, offer that feedback to maybe improve the product, you know, because clearly at Meta, it's all about creating awesome things and trying to improve the product, because that that benefits everyone, benefits the workplace, benefits the consumer. And so I think that we're always going to be a little bit in flux. I think that, you know, to have a vision is great, but to have like, you know, a 20-year goal is that can be pretty hard, because you don't know how things are going to play out. So I think it's about, you know, being kind to one another, you know, accepting other people, listening to them, and then communicating that, hey, there's going to be flux, there's going to be challenges, there will always be challenges. But I think that if people work together from a manager-employee standpoint, from an employee-to-employee standpoint, and then the organization, the employee standpoint, that we can create a better workplace for everyone. In and out of the metaverse.
I know we're short on time, so I'll sum up quickly. I mean, I think that if you look out into the future and you really believe that we're going to be in this two-way dialogue, and the metaverse is going to sort of like level the playing field in a lot of different directions, including from a hierarchy perspective. I think vulnerability and authenticity are going to be two of the most critical things for leaders to focus on. Those obviously go together. It's hard to have a two-way dialogue when you really don't trust the person you're having it with, and trust really comes from that sense of authenticity and vulnerability. And the final thing that I would say is learning. Like, if we really believe that we're going to be in this world of flux and need agility in the coming years, and that's my deep foundational belief. We've obviously said we're in a year of learning. I think this is going to be arguably a decade of learning. So I think leaders having that mindset and really, having a learning orientation is going to be critical if we're going to carry our organizations forward in an agile way.
Just because you graduated school doesn't mean you're not a student anymore.
Got it.
Just mic drop that and walk out.
Mic drop that. That's it. Thanks, Sam.
Wonderful. I mean, what a perfect way to end. Sadly, that is all the time that we have today. Brynn and Dan, thank you so much for your wonderful insights for this conversation. I mean, I've said it to you both before, but I could sit having this discussion for hours. But sadly, people have places that they need to be. To everyone joining us that was listening in, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, and also for sending through so many questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them because there were so many other wonderful questions, but you'll just have to come back the next time. It's all good. So before I do say goodbye to you all, please do take a moment to pull out your phones and access the QR code that is going to be shown to you on screens, which will direct you to our Employee Experience Hub, which has lots more resources about the future of employee experience and how your business can get ahead. Now, from this discussion, you will hopefully all be walking away knowing and being reminded that no matter where you begin, there's never been a better or more critical time to adapt your employee experience than right now. Thank you, Brynn. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone on the call. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.